I moved to Sycamore Hills because I thought I'd finally found a place where I could breathe. Quiet streets, well-manicured lawns, a picturesque little pond where old men in bucket hats sat and fished for fish that, to my knowledge, did not exist. It was a postcard of suburban peace, the kind of place that made you think of backyard barbecues and neighbors who actually waved at you. For a while, that's exactly what I got. Until her. The first time I met Marlene Withers, she was standing on my lawn, hands on her hips, glaring at my mailbox like it had personally insulted her ancestors. "Excuse me?" she barked the moment she saw me. "Did you get approval for this?" I blinked. Approval for what? She jabbed a manicured finger at the mailbox, my perfectly standard black mailbox with a little red flag, just like every other mailbox on the street. It's 2 inches taller than HOA regulations allow. I laughed because surely this was a joke. Surely no rational human being would measure a stranger's mailbox down to the inch. Marlene did not laugh. "I'm the president of the Sycamore Hills Homeowners Association," she informed me, as if announcing her royal title. "And it's my duty to ensure that all properties adhere to the community standards." I quickly learned that community standards meant whatever Marlene Withers personally approved of. I humored her at first, lowered the mailbox, filled out the ridiculous paperwork, even sat through a mandatory HOA meeting where Marlene ruled from a fold-out table like some deranged suburban dictator. I figured if I played nice, she'd leave me alone. I was so wrong. 2 weeks later, a passive-aggressive note appeared in my mailbox, printed in Comic Sans like some kind of war crime. "Your trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 17 minutes after pickup. Please be mindful of our community's aesthetic." I crumpled the note and threw it away. The next week, I got another notice. "Your front yard is 4% more brown than surrounding properties. Please ensure your grass is properly hydrated." What did she want me to do? Individually mist each blade with Evian. The notices kept coming. "Your American flag is too large. Your garden gnome is too whimsical. Your car is too red." At first it was ridiculous. Then it was infuriating. Then it became personal. I soon realized that Marlene wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting me. It escalated fast. Before we continue with this story, let us know where you're watching from. Drop a like on the video and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow we've got another crazy story you won't want to miss. One morning, I woke up to a fine taped to my front door. Not a warning, an actual fine for unauthorized modifications. I looked around, baffled. I hadn't changed anything, and then I saw it. My front door. Marlene had cited me for my own front door. Apparently, the deep blue color, the same one it had been when I bought the house, was not in harmony with the neutral tones of Sycamore Hills. I was being fined for something I didn't even do. I confronted her, of course. Showed up at her house, which somehow had not been cited for the gnome army in her front yard. "Marlene, what the hell is this?" I waved the fine in her face. She took a slow sip from her Live, Laugh, Love mug and smiled like a Stepford wife. "You'll need to submit a request to repaint in an approved color." I stared at her. "But I didn't paint it." "Well," she said, setting down her mug, "then the previous owner violated HOA standards, and as the new homeowner, you're responsible for correcting it." I could feel my eye twitch. "But you approved the sale of this house. You signed off on it. How was I supposed to know?" She shrugged. "You should have read the handbook." I left before I said something that would get me banned from neighborhood potlucks. That night, I repainted. The damn door just to shut her up. A week later, another fine arrived. "Your trash cans were out for 22 minutes this time. Consider this a final warning." I'd had enough. Marlene Withers was drunk on power, and I was done playing her game. So I did something stupid. Something that, in hindsight, I should have seen coming. I put a small garden bed in my front yard, a tiny, tasteful little flower patch right by the mailbox. The next morning, Marlene was at my door. "This was not approved," she snapped already, wielding her clipboard like a weapon. "It's flowers, Marlene." She smiled, slow and vicious. "You didn't submit a landscaping request." I stared at her. "You're telling me that in this free country I need written permission to plant pansies?" She beamed. "That's exactly what I'm saying." It was at this exact moment that I realized Marlene Withers was unhinged, and worse, she was just getting started. I should have backed down. I should have ripped up the flowers, groveled before the HOA throne, and accepted my fate as a cog in Marlene's suburban dictatorship. Instead, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not ripping up my flower bed, Marlene. Go write another Comic Sans hate letter." For a moment, she just stood there, nostrils flaring, the veins in her forehead doing an interpretive dance of rage. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off without another word. I thought I'd won. 2 days later, I learned how very wrong I was. A letter from the HOA arrived, certified mail, like I was being served a subpoena. Due to repeated violations and failure to comply with Sycamore Hills community standards, your property is now under review for potential legal action, including but not limited to fines, liens, and forced sale per HOA bylaws. I read it 3 times just to confirm that yes, I was in danger of being evicted from my own damn home. Over flowers. I had never, in my entire life, met a person so power-tripping, vindictive, and absurdly committed to ruining a single individual's life. That's when the anonymous complaints started rolling in. Marlene had weaponized the entire neighborhood against me. Apparently, my front porch light was too bright. My lawn gnome, the single, lonely gnome I'd placed out of spite, was creating a hostile environment. My driveway had a visible oil stain, making the neighborhood look unkempt. I wouldn't have been surprised if someone accused me of lowering property values by existing. At first, I assumed the other residents of Sycamore Hills were in on it. But then I noticed something strange. Whenever I tried to talk to anyone, they avoided eye contact like I was contagious. They weren't just annoyed. They were scared. Marlene had total control over this place. That's when the fines started piling up. $50 fine for my unauthorized porch mat. A $75 fine because my recycling bin was 1 inch outside the designated zone. A $100 fine for failure to maintain community harmony. I wasn't even sure what the hell that last one meant. Then came the legal threats. I was officially in violation of HOA standards. If I didn't comply, meaning if I didn't rip up the flower bed, repaint my door again, and submit a formal apology to the HOA board, they could escalate to foreclosure proceedings. That's right, foreclosure over pansies. I tried to fight back, hired a lawyer, looked up HOA bylaws, even tried to reason with Marlene, which of course was like trying to negotiate with a rabid raccoon guarding a dumpster. She refused to budge. "You should have just followed the rules," she said sweetly when I confronted her at yet another HOA meeting, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I don't make the rules, dear. I just enforce them." Oh, she was enjoying this. I could see it in the way she smirked every time she handed me another violation. The way she lingered outside my house, waiting for me to slip up. This wasn't about the HOA. This was about power, and she wasn't going to stop until she drove me out of the neighborhood entirely. That's when I realized Marlene Withers was bullying me out of my own damn house, and I refused to let her win. I dug in my heels. I refused to pay the fines. I showed up to every HOA meeting and demanded explanations for their insane rules. I even rallied a few brave neighbors who were just as sick of Marlene's nonsense as I was. She hated that. For the first time, she wasn't in total control. So she escalated. The next morning, I walked outside to find a giant orange notice of violation sign nailed to my front door. It was so large it could be seen from the next street over. I had officially been marked. And then, the final blow. A thick, certified letter arrived. Due to your continued defiance and refusal to comply with HOA regulations, the board has voted to initiate formal proceedings for the forced sale of your property under HOA bylaws. I couldn't believe it. I was actually being evicted from the home I had paid for, over nothing. I was done. I stormed into the next HOA meeting, letter in hand, ready to burn Sycamore Hills to the ground if I had to. The moment I walked in, Marlene smiled, a cold, triumphant smile, like she had already won. But that's the thing about people like Marlene Withers. They get so drunk on their own power, they forget to check their own rules. Because while she had spent months coming after me, I'd done a little digging myself, and I'd found something she never expected, something that was going to change everything. So I sat down, calmly placed the letter on the table, looked Marlene dead in the eye, and said, "You can't evict." "Me, Marlene." She tilted her head, amused. "Oh, and why is that?" I smiled. "Because I own this neighborhood." The room went dead silent. Marlene's smirk froze. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the stunned look on her face. And then, just for fun, I added, "Check the records." Her expression flickered. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked afraid. Marlene's smile didn't just fade. It collapsed, like a dying star, sucked into the black hole of pure, unfiltered panic. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. "Go on," I said, waving a hand. "Check the records." The HOA meeting room, usually filled with Marlene's eager sycophants, had gone so silent you could hear the soul leave her body. A nervous board member, Greg, I think his name was, cleared his throat and yanked out his laptop. His fingers trembled as he clicked through property records. The screen glowed in the dim room, illuminating his growing horror. His eyes darted to Marlene. Marlene?" She didn't respond. She was frozen. "So, I did it for him." "You see," I said, addressing the room, "I did some digging, and it turns out Sycamore Hills was built on land owned by a real estate investment company. That company sold off the houses, but retained ownership of the community itself, meaning the roads, the sidewalks, the park, the HOA itself. All of it technically belongs to that parent company." Greg gulped. "And, that company was recently sold." I smiled wider. "That's right, Greg." I turned back to Marlene. "I bought it." The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of Marlene's control imploding like a sandcastle in high tide. "You're lying," she hissed. I pulled a thick folder from my bag and slammed it on the table. Public records, signed contracts, receipts. Marlene snatched the papers, flipping through them, desperate to find something, anything, to prove I was bluffing. But I wasn't, because while she was busy trying to find me into oblivion, I was busy outmaneuvering her completely. It took some digging, a little networking, and more money than I wanted to spend out of pure spite, but I did it. I owned Sycamore Hills. Every HOA rule, every community bylaw, all of it, was now under my control. "So," I said, tapping the table, "let's talk about all these fines you've been handing out." Marlene's face was pure white-knuckled rage. You think you can just waltz in here and undo everything this community has built?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I don't think, Marlene." "I know." I turned to the rest of the board, effective immediately. "All outstanding fines are voided." Gasps of relief. Marlene slammed her hands on the table. "You can't do that." Greg, sweet, nervous. Greg hesitated. "Actually, he can. If he owns the HOA, he can." I nodded. "That's right. And while we're at it, the ridiculous restrictions are gone." More gasps, more murmurs. People nodding, whispering, smiling. Marlene turned to her loyal followers, desperate for support, but no one was backing her up. Because suddenly, without her power, she wasn't a queen anymore. She was just an angry woman in a floral cardigan, and then came the final blow. I clasped my hands together and smiled. "Oh, and one more thing." Marlene flinched. "I'm disbanding the HOA." Dead silence. Marlene actually wobbled, like she might faint. You can't!" she shrieked. Greg, bless his soul, hesitated again. Then, in a small voice, he mumbled, "Actually, he can." Marlene's entire existence shattered in real time. "No, no, no!" she screamed. "This is my neighborhood. I built this community. You can't just take it away." I shrugged. "Oh, but I can." Her breathing went erratic. I'll sue." I grinned. "For what? I legally own everything now." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. She had lost. She knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. And the people who had been too afraid to stand up to her? They suddenly weren't afraid anymore. That was the moment Marlene Withers' reign of terror officially ended. She Stormed out of the meeting, livid, humiliated, defeated. It was glorious. The next week, the changes went into effect. No more pointless fines. No more insane restrictions. People celebrated. They started repainting their houses whatever color they wanted. Front yards filled with garden gnomes, wind chimes, actual personality. And best of all, Marlene, she moved out. Couldn't stand living in a neighborhood she couldn't control. Poetic justice at its finest. But here's the best part. About a month later, I got a letter in the mail from Marlene. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No words, just a single fine. For having an unauthorized flower bed. I laughed for a full 10 minutes. Then I shredded it and watered my flowers. Because this was my neighborhood now.